All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? I think you and I can both agree, as I've said many, many times on the show, that America and the world is truly good, healthy, and on the right track. We're not in any horrible wars right now. Going to the airport's really fun. Sometimes I just go to the airport to hang out. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even need to catch a flight. The airport's just that cool these days. I think our economy's really fucking good. I think we're just at a really good point. And to really hammer that point home, Brian, I think you and I should talk about something that we've only kind of hinted at before, which is the religious culture of our young people and including people of our generation. Would you agree that it's generally very healthy, especially people that convert in later age?
I would say not only is it healthy, but it's the natural progression. It's everything you're supposed to do. Usually people do it when they feel very strong and very clear. I feel like it's probably very empowering for them to do that. Can't see any downside to it. I think basically if you do that, especially if you do that, kind of on a whim because you're feeling kind of alienated and powerless, basically everything's going to fall into place for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And actually, I'm getting word from our handlers. I know we haven't talked to them in a while, but apparently Zoomer Christians especially are kind of weird and kind of fucked up. Is that true, Brian?
It seems like that. And it's not even, it's weird in a distinct way from previous generations. I think is, as I understand it, that's the nut of this whole episode, right? It's not just that there are Christians in America of all ages and there's Christians in America of all dispositions and all political backgrounds and all cultures. It's not really that it's a specific like revivalist Christianity that is separate from their parental upbringing, not necessarily, but often is separate from their parental upbringing and is very online.
Yes, very online, something that we are definitely part of. So I think without further ado, let's deep dive into the subject because I feel like we're going to have a lot of complicated feelings on. But before we get into our subject, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week.
Generational moment of when? Of the week.
Woo! Yeah! And you know what, Brian? This is your episode for this week. What do you have for us when it comes to a cringe generational segment? I'm very excited because it's been a while since we've recorded.
This is actually a cringe zoomer. And this is actually kind of like, the treat before the meat of the episode. Taylor, do you follow MMA at all?
Kind of, not really. Actually, hilariously enough, real quick, my girlfriend, one of her cousins is literally a professional MMA fighter. So I know of that guy specifically, and I know, Randy Couture, and, I know Brock Lesnar. He was in the WWE back in the day, but he's, off and on UFC now. So I know a couple people, but not too much beyond that.
And I'm not necessarily being ironic when I say this is a cool guy. Did you know, does the name Winged Sea mean anything to you?
No, I have no idea. I'm fascinated by this already.
Winged Sea is an MMA guy, a semi-professional MMA guy who's kind of blown up on TikTok and Instagram. And again, I'm not being entirely ironic when I say, like, I'm being a little ironic, but not entirely when I say that I don't think this guy is cringe. He's like a Christian Zoomer MMA guy who does he's kind of like tongue-in-cheek online content, and he also gets his ass beat constantly, right? I mean, he has a few wins. I'm actually on his Tapopedia right now, and he's got a few like amateur wins, but his professional MMA record right now is 0-1-0. That means 0 win, 1 loss, 0 draw. He says things before matches to his opponents like, I pray for you without your consent, just to get them so pissed off. He enters the ring and he does funny little dances and little jigs. He has a cross taped onto his chest, and he is 24 years old. He is 5'6" and 126 pounds.
That is a skinny boy, let me tell you. I mean, to be fair, I think by actual BMI standards, that's still normal, but that is tiny for an American man, let me tell you.
Yeah, for an American man in general and in MMA. And this guy, he is an unironic Christian, right? He posts kind of like inspiring, funny, worked up MMA content that is kind of taken off with young men. He says funny shit like, I pray for you without your consent, before some guy that's, twice the size of him fucking drives him through the floor, which he knows is about to happen, by the way. He dances around on stage as these guys are getting ready to pummel his ass. He acts really spastic and twitchy, which of course makes all these guys mad because why is he even here with them? I highly recommend, as an example, not altogether, I don't know a ton about the guy. Presumably his politics are not my politics, politics, but what I've seen of him is incredibly entertaining and largely seems to be more or less positive, at least within the sphere of online Christianity and especially within the sphere of MMA culture. Definitely recommend looking at some clips of Wicked C on TikTok or Instagram. He owns, and he is an extremely Zoomer Christian in every way.
Interesting. So to me, this sounds like a classic wrestler heel. Would you agree with that, Brian? Do you think there's some
But
similarities?
he's absolutely doing the heel bit. But the thing is, he's so nice, and people love him. And people love him knowing that he, like, very aware that he gets his ass kicked constantly. His fans do these streams of him where he's going up against these guys who are, again, much, I hate to say they're more serious fighters than he is, because he has a fighting record. He's got some wins. He's clearly taken some classes. He's developed, some minimal skill at mixed martial arts. And they have these streams where he steps into the ring against this guy that is going to clobber him. And as soon as they take him out, the whole scream goes, no, no. And they're being, like, they know he's going to get his ass kicked, but they're kind of being sincere. His whole bit is that he comes in there 5'6", 126 pounds, and he's basically always like, I'm not afraid of anything because I've got God and Christ on my side, and I'm just bringing love into MMA through Christ. And then he gets his ass beat, and he just keeps going, doing like a heel thing, but as a hero. Like, he's made himself like the main character of MMA for a certain type of like goofy, like brain rot, irony, poison guy.
When I said the heel, the classic wrestler heel, I think that's also a pretty common characteristic of wrestler heels, because generally wrestler heels were actually generally pretty like nice people outside the ring. It's actually usually more the faces and like the baby faces that were big assholes in real life. So I think it's kind of interesting. Although I will say personally that I haven't been into wrestling since I was literally like elementary schooler. So I don't know how things are with, faces and heels these days. But like that was the first thing that came out to me when you said he was, functionally a heel, a little bit more of a self-aware and obviously more earnest
he's definitely
heel.
it's like he's doing a heel thing to the guys he's up against in the sport, and it seems like more earnest. Okay, one of the things is that this guy, not on steroids, right? Like, you look at this guy and he is not fucking juiced up. Secondly is you can watch him and he's acting goofy and he's spastic, but he clearly has like trained a little bit. It's a good bit, and it is very specifically like this breed of like Zoomer Christian revivalism that we're talking about.
Hell yeah. Well, speaking of hell yeah, let's get into our subject, because you know what, Brian? This is something that you've brought up for a while. We haven't recorded in, God, almost a month at this point. So, it's been a while. It's something that I had been thinking about as a subject. And to be honest with you, Brian, I feel like you should lead most of the discussion here, and then I'll have certain points to bring up. Because to be honest with you, when it comes to the Christianity subject, it's one of those things where I have quite a lot of bias against it. I'm just going to be fully honest here. Of course, we have, several Christians who are, part of our...
They're our whack pack.
Yeah, our camaraderie, our crew, etc. But in general, I have quite a lot of negative history with Christianity in general. And, to be fair, religion in general, but Christianity most definitely. So I'm curious, Brian, and obviously I've seen, especially the modern day sort of online Christianity subculture, and it is just so baffling in so many ways. So I'm curious, what are some of your takeaways from this sort of cultural thing that's happening with younger people?
The first and foremost thing, and this is all observational, I'm not a Christian. I came up on the political left during the kind of neocon Bush Iraq War era, but I don't have the same baggage with Christianity as you, because my parents were basically just kind of Christian in the vague way that a lot of Americans are. My mom especially was very like politically progressive and would describe herself as being extremely liberal. We didn't really go to church except on holidays. You know what I mean? It wasn't, I didn't go to like a religious school. I wasn't really forced to go to church by either of my parents. So while I have all the typical leftist critiques of like right-wing Christianity and consider myself an atheist and all that shit, I don't have that personal baggage, and I know many people that do, and I thank God pretty ironically every day that I don't have that. So it's clearly been pretty awful for a lot of people. I think the thing that is fascinating to me as an outsider and a kind of, I guess, like amateur anthropologist to this younger millennials, but it's a lot of like Zoomers, this online Christian thing. First of all, there's lots of different stripes to it, right? It's like anything else. But that it seems to have very little to do with traditional American conservatism, and it seems to have, for a lot of them, it has very little to do with their family traditions. And that's not to say that a lot of it isn't extremely reactionary, because of course a lot of it is. But it's a different thing than this kind of like this evangelical neocon movement thing. It's very online, it's very about memes, and it's very, not all the time, it can be very retaliatory, right? It kind of feels like if a younger millennial, or you're, basically any Zoomer, you came up and you basically are coming up as the end of history is ending, right? right, as it's collapsing and it's withering away. And you're seeing the failures of liberalism every second of your day when you're growing up. That's economic neoliberal policies, but it is also, and I might catch some flack as like someone on the left here, it's also a failure in certain ways of, I think, the emphasis on social liberalism, and that as the end all be all of progressive movements and like the most positive organization to a society. Because if you're coming up and you're constantly seeing what's the thing that a lot of Christians say that frankly is, in my opinion, it's a pretty dumb thing to say, but they'll all say like, well, without religion, morals are all relative. Like, obviously that's not true, but the thing is, to a lot of American liberals, sometimes it does seem like morals are relative. When they talk about war, when they talk about like income disparity, when they talk about organizing lines, it seems like their morals are relative, and they're really open to this idea that it's like, well, we're just liberals and our morals are kind of, we don't want to impose a moral on anyone. And I think that's the thing, that if you're coming up and you're watching the American economy have nothing for you, and you're watching the class that you were foisted up to be into, which is, the middle class, most likely, dissolve, and then your only options are, as you're growing up, are this kind of corny, stodgy, neocon, kind of very soft-spoken, but very like, that's just the way it is thing. Or it's this, it's what a lot of the most reactionary sides of this would say. It's like you're screeching blue-haired feminists, which is obviously them being misogynistic. It's them being stupid and not knowing what they're talking about. But they are sort of, I think, at some level, recognizing this isn't going to lead anywhere societally. They see this online kind of whatever liberalism or idpol thing on one side, and they see that as like, well, this isn't moving anything forward. And then they see the economic collapse, the kind of pulling away from all possibility for them as they're coming of age. And they have no left analysis because there is no left in America. It's been completely destroyed. So if you're looking for something that's illiberal and that's kind of an alternate, that's going to give you some sense of like structure, some sense of clarity, in a lot of cases, you're not even going to consider going to like socialism, scientific socialism as a worldview, but you might get kind of pulled into some spheres that are kind of Christian revivalist. And that includes, but it's not limited to, of course, like the black pill Catholic thing, which is kind of adjacent to like the Nick Fuentes Groyper thing. It's not all like that. It's not all that reactionary, and it's not all that insincere, and it's not all that nasty. But I think it's all kind of a symptom of that. It's like, I'm young or I'm coming of age and I'm looking for some sort of clarity because there is none in my waking world, and I can't see any over the horizon coming in this life.
No, absolutely. And, just to have a real quick overview of my sort of baggage with Christianity, because of course, Brian, you said you didn't really have any, which, is fantastic, obviously. But, I grew up in, I would argue, kind of a nominally Christian family. My mom, raised me as a single mom. I have two much older siblings, so I don't really have many memories of them growing up. So I was functionally basically an only child. And my mom was, nominally Christian, but not super devout. She didn't really go to church very often. She went to church maybe a handful of times a year, and I think still does, but she wanted me to get a better education, so she sent me to private Catholic school growing up. And man, being in a Catholic school around the turn of the millennium, of course 9/11 and the lead up to the Iraq War, was fucking miserable. The type of Christians that I think a lot of liberation Catholics and liberation Christian theology and stuff, those motherfuckers didn't exist in the early 2000s in America, just straight up. Like, it was so
certainly not in Wisconsin.
No, it was so fucking conservative. It was so reactionary. Everybody was every Catholic was a Republican in fucking Northeast Wisconsin in early 2000s, and like a neocon Republican, which like a neocon Republican Catholic should be an oxymoron, but holy fuck, it really, in America, really ain't, unfortunately. So I dealt with a lot of bullshit. I dealt with a lot of bigotry. I dealt with a lot of hypocrisy. And like, I'm going to be honest, I didn't meet a Christian that I thought was somebody who I thought even embodied the actual mythos and like actual values of Christianity until like I was probably an adult. Like, I thought they all were fucking garbage throughout literally my entire childhood, because they were just, like I said, so bigoted, so hypocritical, and just so antithetical to any actual like positive biblical teachings. Like, they'd say all the nice things at church, and then literally 5 minutes later say something awful about the Middle East, or say something fucking awful about gay people. It was just honestly a decade of hell, being like the only person who was like, this is kind of fucked up, actually. It was awful. It was genuinely fucking terrible. And
I can only imagine going to a Catholic Catholic school at that time. It sounds hellish.
It really was fucking awful. And, like I said, nowadays I've met, more positive, variations and individuals who profess Christian faith. And, of course, I have a little bit more of a, lightened view of it. But like, I was like the most annoying Reddit atheist for like my entire childhood and well into my early adulthood. And to be honest, I still kind of hold on to a certain amount of those values. Not obviously the new atheism stuff, because the new atheism stuff was like fucking Jeffrey Epstein shit nowadays.
Yeah.
We fucking know that bullshit. And thankfully, I left that kind of, especially the, neocon Islamophobic stuff. I left that shit a long fucking time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If I were to describe myself like from the age of like 21 onward, I would have described myself as like atheism plus if I was going to be an annoying like Reddit atheist. But like, yeah, it just was an awful time growing up and not believing in the dogma of your, culture and your social group for like the first like decade of your cognizant life or so. It was pretty rough. I'm not going to lie. So that's my introduction to Christianity. And nowadays I'm seeing like, talk about especially the Zoomer aspect, because that's what I feel like I really want to hyper focus on, because that's honestly most of the Christianity that I see is like
that we're seeing.
It really depends on which Zoomer Christians you're talking about. I think the Zoomer Catholics are the most interesting to me in a way, because like a lot of Zoomer Catholicism, especially the hyper online stuff, is so nihilistic. Yeah, like I said, nihilistic, and it's just like so perverse in a way that doesn't even make sense. Like it's one of those things where they just think of themselves as having to be so chaste that they become like vile degenerates, like sort of anti-masturbation, anti-gooning, which we've referenced on the show that gooning nowadays is just synonymous with jacking off, but that's not what gooning is. So like they're against any kind of pleasure at all. And you could argue that Catholics to a certain extent in scripture are against pleasure, and that's not necessarily an invalid critique. But at the same time, like Catholics still like they do celebrations. Like say what you want, but Catholics are the ones that if you're going to a Catholic majority country and you want to get fucked up, you will have fun in a Catholic country. Go to Mexico, go to Ireland, like I said, anywhere in the Latin America, go to like Central Europe and stuff, and you'll meet Catholics, and unless it's like a specific church day, they will have fucking fun. You know what I mean? But these fucking idiots never have any fun. They're miserable. They're reactionary and miserable and hateful, and they want to see the world burn because they frankly don't think that the world should have any kind of pleasure in it. It should just be death and destruction and like forced birth. And of course, I mean, we can talk about like the sexual coercion aspect of like these Zoomer Catholics and how fucking like nauseating that shit is. It's also bigoted, would it be very clear, bigoted, very misogynistic, very, very misogynistic.
That's the central focus of it, is it's kind of a perfect marriage of the black pill incel thing to a more traditional religious framework. It kind of amounts to like, it's these kids who are like, there's nothing in this world. This world is disgusting. This world is degenerate. This world has nothing to offer of substance, which again is, I think, and this is maybe going to raise some eyebrows, I think that is on some level, these kids who were raised in America with no left alternative, kind of recognizing a failure of liberalism as they come of age. And then they grab onto the only thing that there is a cultural space for in America, which is this mutation of Christianity. One of the things that's really important, I think, when we talk about the Zoomer Christian revival, and specifically the Zoomer Catholic revival and the kind of the nihilist element to it, which I'm glad you brought up because it's kind of my impetus for doing this, is that it seems in a lot of cases to not be a thing that they were raised with. I know I said that earlier. It's not like you're like, I'm Catholic because my family's Catholic, and I was in communion and I ate the wafers and I drank the wine or whatever. It's a thing that they find through memes when they're already online, when they're already searching and kind of alienated and frustrated, and they go, oh, this is a thing that is about order and reason, and it's a worldview that lines with this life of denial that I have chosen, or that I feel correctly or incorrectly has been foisted onto me by this nation, right? By this modernist nation. It's not like a thing for a lot of them that's like, well, we're Catholic and we go to church. It's, I'm a fucking based, like, black-pilled Catholic, and I'm posting about it. I hate all these sluts, and I hate all of these smelly foreigners. This country is mine. And there's less extreme versions of it, and there's more extreme versions of it, but that's the nut of it, right? Is that they found it through the internet and kind of communally because there's nothing for them as far as they can tell.
And you want to know who the ultimate face of that is, Brian? And it's somebody we've made fun of multiple times in the show, and I would argue is the peak cringe millennial, maybe in American history and maybe world history, is fucking J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is this motherfucker to a T, because you're right, he didn't grow up with Catholicism specifically. I mean, I'm sure he grew up like nominally Christian, whichever Christian sect.
But he was also a tech nerd, so he was probably functionally an atheist for most of his life.
Yes, in fact, I think there were like actual writings of him in like college being like, religion's fucking stupid. And, of course, he was a famous anti-Trump guy, before he became fucking
he was a
senator and before he became
logic-pilled,
vice
less
president.
wrong libertarian guy.
Exactly. And, I think he is the ultimate face of why this whole shit is just so nakedly stupid on its face. Because somebody as much of a fucking brain-dead psychopath, fucking simpleton piece of shit scumbag as JD Vance, if that's the guy who, like, all these, like, based Catholic Zoomers are like, this is our king, that should tell you how fake your movement is. Because JD Vance doesn't believe in fucking anything. Like, nothing at all. And,
no, he believes in denial. That's what he's come to decide he believes in.
Yes. It's one of those things we're talking about. He's, like, just so against, like, degeneracy, in theory, that he becomes kind of degenerate himself. That's why, like, he's abandoning his wife to go around with Erica Kirk, for God's sakes. Like, he's just so fucking empty. He has 2 children in a mixed race marriage, and, like, he's talking about getting the Jeets out of here. His wife is literally Indian.
It's disgusting. So
his kids are Indian ethnically. Like, it's disgusting.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because this is the thing I think about often.
Real quick, Brian, and this is a statement that I've seen a lot of liberal, like, boomers make. A man who is not willing or able to stand up for his own wife and children will not save
exactly
100%.
Exactly. So this is kind of a tangent, because it's not specific to Christians. It's kind of specific to reactionary American men in general. It's this fixation with the aesthetic of masculinity, with the remnants of a time when being a man, with a family made you the top of the pecking order. And then they shit on trans people, and they shit on gay people, and they talk about this traditional family model and things. And they say that's why there are these gender hierarchies. That's why there are these male-female roles. Historically, what is the one positive thing you could claim? If you are saying, I believe in traditional, like, marriage roles, and it's my duty as a husband and father to do this, it's to stand up for and protect your wife and kids. That's a masculine coded value that is part of that. And guess what? If you feel like you should reap the benefits of this traditional gender structure, then you at the very least need to be able to do that. And I guarantee you that 50, 60 years ago, a guy almost like JD Vance probably would have been able to do it. But these guys, they're so far removed from that. They're, like I said, they're grasping for the aesthetic of that era. And then when it comes time to do the most basic thing, which is to say, this is my wife and this is my kids and this is my family, and I'm a traditional man who believes in family, and don't fucking talk about my wife and my kids that way. They can't fucking do it. It's disgusting. As someone who spends a lot of time thinking about the position, I think that, like, a lot of young men in this country are in, and older men, like millennial men, and even probably beyond that, just like as society changes, the way that we're targeted by these groups, the way that we've been in largely good ways, but the culture has shifted in the last 50 years, and it's displaced a lot of positions that would be a given for a lot of men, and it's left a lot of people looking, and it's like the one thing you sit there and you say, I'm a real man, I'm a traditional man, and the one fucking thing that you should have to do to fucking get that, to, like, stand up for your wife and kids, which should be the easiest, most instinctual thing in the world, he can't fucking do it, and none of them can fucking do it. It's pathetic. I hate it so much. I disrespect it so much.
No, absolutely. And, that's another thing about, like, the, especially the trad cath Zoomer thing in particular, is that, like, they talk about how they want, this sort of, like, traditional relationship or this or that or whatever. But these guys, they all live in their fucking basements. They all live in their mom's basement. They don't have any sort of, like, actual, like, positive dating history. These guys might be, like, 23, but they want to date, like, a fucking freshly legal 18-year-old at best. I mean, some of them say even more heinous shit, like child marriage and bullshit like that. And then they're like, oh yeah, but I want her to do all the work and we just do 50-50 and, like, whatever. It's like, but that's not traditional. Yeah, you want a child bride fuck slave. That's what you want. And, like, obviously that is something that, like, if anybody actually advertises that they want that, and obviously I'm not, free speech and all that, but, like, that's somebody who should, like, be looked into. But there's, like, tens of thousands of these fucking assholes online who say this same horrible shit every day. And, like, they're no different than, like, Andrew Tate. But, like, they claim that they're, like, these based Catholic traditional people. And it's like, you couldn't be further.
There's nothing traditional about their life. It's completely liberal degeneracy, just like every fucking one else. And
it's liberal degeneracy, and it's very Bugman pilled. It's crazy. It's such Bugman shit.
Now we're moving even further away from someone like Vance, and I think into, like, more the Groyper space, which is Nick Fuentes is almost a mirror image of, like, 20 years younger of JD Vance. Whether they think it or not, they're the same. They're these weird kind of postmodern Catholics who believe in punishment and the denial of joy of other people in various ways. And they might say that they hate each other, that they're enemies, but that's both essentially what their theology amounts to. I want to make this good. This is not for me an anti-theology. Kind of the thing that came from this was me reading a lot of different, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years reading a lot of socialist theory, a lot of socialist history, and that's kind of led to me reading different parts of theology. And I was like, oh, that's weird how the American metamorphosis of religion is this black-pilled Zoomer thing, which to me, from almost any other part of the world, any other school of thought, would be pretty antithetical to Christianity. even if it's not like some base socialist, like leftist Christianity. I'm not claiming they're all that. I'm claiming that this black-pilled nihilist thing that's all about being degenerate online, that would be alien to a Protestant in the 50s. That would be alien to like Catholics in Latin America. That would not be any sort of Christianity that they could recognize. I guarantee it.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned Nick Fuentes specifically, who, I would argue at this point is definitely the king of grapers. That is a man who is a walking contradiction in so many ways. He is a open white nationalist, even though he's half Mexican. He talks so negatively about basically every minority you can think of, but he's very clearly I wouldn't even say closeted gay man. He's barely closeted. Yeah. I mean, there's literally videos of him having gay sex, for God's sakes. Like, Nick that's Fuentes not even a thing. That's a thing you could just find on the internet. Like, come on.
Well, so I don't have, obviously there's evidence pointing to that, but also like people sometimes will say, including people who are closer to us politically, when they're being kind of bad boys, they're being bad, and they say, but Fuentes is funny sometimes, which like very rarely, and when he is funny, it's because he's channeling his inner fucking gay bitch. He's being like an old school mean gay guy. That is when he can make a joke. The other experience is, I don't think Fuentes himself has ever really said this, but a lot of his followers, and this has always been true of the far right, but like they're very openly obsessed with trans women, and they say that's because those are like real humans, because they're so disgusted with cis women that they've abandoned any pretense of wanting to be around them, even for sex. And a lot of them are like, well, why don't I just fuck trans women? It all starts to kind of add up and lead to a certain place, and none of those places are traditional Christianity.
No, and obviously we made the reference to Nick Fuentes being gay, which like there's really no question on that. He's very clearly gay. But like, there's that old critique that, I remember especially from, talking about once again my childhood or whatever, that anybody who is homophobic, bigoted, whatever, they just secretly wanted that, which I think is honestly mostly a bullshit critique. I think you can just be a bigot and not have anything underneath the surface. But I do think a lot of these guys who, and not all of them, but certainly some of them, right? Like they just hate women so much that it really makes you think like, interesting that you just hate women so much that you kind of come around to being gay. It's, kind of like the clavicular thing to a certain extent too. He's kind of a rising star.
Clavicular is like an atheist black-pilled Catholic.
No, absolutely. But that's the other thing though too, is that you talk about the misogyny, and that's kind of, I would say, the most common bigotry demographic of these people specifically is misogyny, is that it does, just in general, bigotry is just one of those things that just really destroys your own life in so many ways. Like you become so misogynistic that you literally stop yourself from enjoying the one actual sexual and gender demographic that you actually want. Like that sounds horrible. That sounds like a life not even worth living, to be honest with you. And I'm not talking about asexual people specifically, because obviously
no, like of course,
if you have a sex drive but you're just so disgusted with the one demographic you actually want to have sex with that you never do, that sounds like a nightmare, just nightmare on itself. But you put yourself into that because you become isolated from your own community and get attached to these fucking weirdos online who never leave their mom's basement, just like you. It's awful. I kind of feel bad, but I also don't. I'm gonna be honest.
But when you hit a certain, I feel bad until they hit a certain age. Until they hit 24, 25, I feel pretty bad. If they hit mid-20s, I don't feel bad anymore. Too old. You got to figure it out for yourself, and then I stop feeling bad.
Exactly, because if you're 15 and you're like, I'm only gonna marry another 15-year-old and she's got to be pure, like I'm like, well, you'll grow out of that shit. Who cares? But yeah, if you're 25 and still saying like I want a 15-year-old child bride or whatever, then yeah, you need to be put on a list, or at the very least, when the revolution comes, you'll be put up against the wall, motherfucker. Like just straight up, seriously.
And what really brought me to the point of wanting to talk about this as a subject on the podcast, where specifically, I just want to reiterate, this is not an episode about religion or about Christianity. This is specifically about black pill Catholic Zoomers and kind of like the very online space they're in and what we think it's an expression of. This is not about religion. This is about a very specific subculture and kind of wondering why it's growing and why it's becoming so weirdly influential. So I've been thinking a lot lately with the kidnapping of Maduro in Venezuela, with now the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the attacks in Iran, which are decimating schools, much like the ones committed by Israel, which are murdering lots of civilians. I've kind of over the last few years shifted in my stance to being like, oh, I'm not like just like against economic neoliberalism. I am, but it's kind of like, oh, I think that emphasizing social liberalism, quote unquote, while denying any sort of cultural camaraderie, any sort of solidarity, any sort of communal identity, I think that's created this thing where it is like basically like a liberal degeneracy that's like, well, it's not great that we're doing this in Iran, but we got to do it for our security. It's not, obviously it's not great, everything that happens in Gaza, but, very complicated. Whenever you hear a liberal say it's very complicated, did something that involves, the murders of civilians, that involves human life, they're giving up to liberal moral relativism. They're saying, well, there's no absolute moral. It's all subjective. It's all a matter of perspective. And so, who are we to really say? And I do think that that is related to like the economic decay and the community decay we see in America. And I do think that a lot of these young people, they're seeing the lack of a clear, like, moral decision to make, and they're going, well, fuck that. And they're choosing the only other option, like I said, that they have, because they certainly don't have a scientific socialist option readily available to them if you're the average teenager in America. So they go towards this thing, which is very morally judgmental and very absolutist and very bigoted and dictatorial. And then I started thinking, like, well, how does that happen? How does it happen that gradually over generations? Because one of the things that I've learned is that when we talk about Christian socialism, and I don't mean Jesus hung out with poor people, he threw the bankers out of the temple, he was a socialist. I hate when people say that, because it's like, well, all kinds of people hate bankers. All kinds of people are friends with poor people. That's not socialism. But there is, especially in the 19th century and the early 20th century, basically up until World War II, there's a Christian socialist and Christian communist movement that is not Marxist. It's not opposed to Marxism either. And it's pretty influential. It's pretty important. And it moves a lot of activism during the Great Depression is done by these Christian socialist groups. And it's a real thing that existed that was not based in liberal moral relativism. It was based on, their reading, their interpretation of the Bible. It was that to be more of Christ, to create the world that Christ wants for all people, we need to create like an egalitarian socialist society. That's a moral decision that we're making. So these were not, if you are a modern Christian and, maybe you don't identify with Democrats, you don't identify with, liberalism in modern America as you understand it, just if you're wondering, these are not just people, these were not people who did some online posting, some easy gotcha trying to get people on hypocrisy by saying, well, actually, Jesus said that you should share, so Jesus was socialist. These aren't people like that. These are people who are probably more serious about their Christianity than you, as, an American who's studying the Bible, an American Zoomer millennial studying the Bible, an American 2026 will ever be. These are people who believed in the literal word of the Bible, believed in the literal kingdom of heaven with Jesus at the side of God, and devoted their life to that, to studying that, and their interpretation, which they could back with a lot of history and a lot of time spent and a lot of thought, was that an egalitarian socialist society, a post-capitalist, rationally planned structural society, was the most Christ-like and most orderly way that we could move forward as a society. So it isn't just like some kind of gimmicky, like, oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm also cool thing. They were about it in a way that some fucking black-pilled groiper who's like doing nofap for 3 weeks before they break and have a 4-day goon session and then flagellate themselves. Someone like that would never be able to understand this level of dedication to the Bible or to the spreading of Christianity. And just to give an idea of some of the people, just how prominent as a movement, Christian socialism, it's sort of a no-brainer, especially at the time. As the Cold War heats up, Marxism-Leninism becomes the face of socialism for good and for bad in a lot of the world. It's pretty easy for the Christian socialists, who largely were, of course, not Marxists, to be cast aside by both critics on the left who felt that they were, not being scientific, they were being reactionary, they were being conservative in their values, but especially to people on the right. So during the Cold War, Christianity kind of becomes absorbed into the American conservative moray, but it was not always like that. So if you're young and you're thinking back, you're like, well, I'm conservative because that's the Christian thing. Well, it was only really like that, from the 50s onward. That wasn't always a given. And just an idea of some of the people in, leaders in the Christian socialist movement, particularly in the UK and England. Francis Bellamy, who wrote the original Pledge of Allegiance, was a prominent Christian socialist. Frederick James Furnivall, who edited the Canterbury Tales and published the original Oxford English Dictionary and wrote it. Prominent Christian socialist. We've got people like Wallace Wobbles. He's most famous in America. The only book by him that's published is this book called Think Like a Rich Man, which is basically a self-help book from like the late 1800s about how to change your mind so you're constantly looking for innovation, you're constantly looking for possibilities, you're constantly open to like learning and seizing. That's the only book in America by him that's promoted. So people think that he's like a free market, finance bro, self-help Christian. He was a Christian socialist. He actually referred to himself as a Christian Bolshevik later in life. So that book, in the context of the rest of his work, is about changing the way you view the world. It's not just about like, here's how I think to get rich, although he certainly does tell you that it'll help you do that. But his actual most prominent works that are largely out of print in the US are the books A New Antichrist and Jesus, the Man and His Work, which are manifestos that posit Jesus as basically an early dialectician. Now, I'm not saying I agree with all of this. I do consider myself like a scientific socialist. I lean towards, I'd say, like Marxist Leninist tendencies, but this is like, he put a lot of thought into this. This is a serious Christian perspective to reconcile like essentially revolutionary socialism at the turn of the century. Very compelling books, and they are very socialist and they're very Christian. These guys weren't like, if you're sitting here and you're going, well, I kind of believe in Christianity and I want to reject this modernity and this degeneracy. Well, there's other ways to do that than by becoming like a monster man who sits on Discord for 12 hours a day. There's other schools of thought that you've probably never had access to or even probably ever knew existed because of where and when you grew up. It's depressing like everything else is in 2026. I don't want to forget that the nut of the black-pilled, youthful Catholic or Christian revival thing, the nihilism, the judgmental brain rot shit, that does come from people that are on some level, I think, noticing a real thing as they come to age. And they have nowhere else to go with that feeling, and they have no way to articulate it. But I just would say, if you're looking at all this shit, and maybe you feel weird about this, I've heard this from like people I know who are Christians, who maybe aren't sure politically how they feel, but they know that they believe in the Bible and they know that they love Jesus or whatever. Not to like, they could express that better than I could. That like, I know there are people that see all the weird online reactionary shit and they go, this is fucking weird. I don't think I like this. And there are other ways, if you're serious about being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or probably any religion. I don't know. I'm not a religious guy. There are other serious perspectives from people with those beliefs who have devoted their lives to them.
No, absolutely. And, I have an interesting takeaway from that too is, it's one of those things where you talked about obviously the Christian aspect of it, but also the sort of, left socialism to even communist aspect of it, right? But like a lot of things that Americans think of, particularly when it comes to like, oh, this person was so foundational or oh, this person came up with something that we all know about. A lot of those people, and not all of them obviously, but quite a few of those people are what we would describe today as like leftist socialists or even communists. Like, of course, you talked about the, Pledge of Allegiance and stuff like that. This isn't necessarily American, or I think she might have been American, but I could be wrong about that. But like, like Mother's Day or like International Women's Day or like anything that you could think of where people are like, oh, I'm going to do this nice thing with my family. To be honest, it was probably came up by a left winger or at the very least like a, Christian liberation theology.
Liberation theology. So that is actually, I didn't recommend it here. Gustavo Gutierrez, who is kind of like the guy, kind of like the Lenin of liberation theology, has written some incredible books, but they're very academic. To be honest, I'm pretty sure they require a deeper understanding of theology than I have, so I haven't read very much by him. But yeah, liberation theology, which goes back far longer than this weird black pill Catholic, we're the oldest Christians and, we're the strictest ones. It's so much older than those dumbasses. And a lot of the liberation theology people, including Gustavo Gutierrez, are Catholic, are serious Catholics.
No, absolutely. And, I think the takeaway that I want to have from what you just mentioned, and, you talked about obviously we talked about the Groypers and we talked about the trad cats or whatever, right? But like, the truth is for a lot of the guys who aren't just motivated to be this religion due to their own resentment and hatred and bigotry. But like, if you're genuinely interested in an alternative to like just bland Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries level bullshit liberalism, then that's a much better option than just, frankly, joining a very reactionary religious movement that at the end of the day just upholds those values that you hate so much. Like, find something that doesn't uphold the values that you hate. It's one of those things where like all these like right-wing guys become like Pizzagate people, and then they learn that like that was all created by Jeffrey Epstein, and then like their entire worldview collapses.
And now they're in too deep.
No, exactly. If a ideology that you supported has initial backing by fucking billionaire pedophiles, then don't be that. It's that simple. Or I guess if you're gonna be like some sort of stupid anti-Epstein contrarian retard, then I guess go ahead. But like, unless you're one of those, don't do that.
Yeah.
But like, it's one of those things where like, unless you want a billionaire pedophile ideology, do the exact opposite of what the fuck they want. It's that simple. Even if you want to be a pedophile, why would you want to ruin your life? Like, it's one of those things where just get out of that shit, motherfucker. Or to be fair, if you are a unrepentant pedophile, I guess, find a cliff to jump off of, I guess. But that's not here or there.
There's programs out there for you. Unfortunately, there aren't enough of them because there's no social programs or good health care.
To be fair, there is is post-conviction. So that's where the problem starts.
Yeah,
Unfortunately for those people. But, that's not here or there. That's the one thing I have. But no, yeah, it's one of those things where the, sort of liberation theology to a certain extent, and of course the, once again, left Christianity that America did genuinely offer at one point. It's really saddening to me that the way that American Christianity has just kind of metastasized in a lot of ways is just overwhelmingly reactionary in the public view. Because, it's one of those things where it is historical. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to have where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a religious movement. And to be fair, it's not even just Christianity, to be very clear. To a certain extent, Judaism has even turned into that. And, Islam, of course, depends on, yeah, I know, right? But Islam waffles here and there depending on which sect you go. I would say most American Muslims are generally far more liberal than their European or even mainland Arab or Asian counterparts. But, it's one of those things where there's still some problematic elements here and there, obviously. But, it's one of those things with and obviously, Brian, neither of us are, Jewish. And, to be clear, I actually don't know that many Jews personally. I mean, I live in Milwaukee, which has Wisconsin's by far largest Jewish community. And talk about the reactionary turn, right? And technically it's not part of their ideology, but all their institutions have become it, the Zionist entity. It went from a extremely fringe ideology to now where in America, Jewish institutions are pretty much universally Zionist. There's really no differentiation in their ideology.
And again, in fact,
interestingly enough, incredibly ahistorical. When Zionism first came out, it was extremely niche. It was one of those things that it had basically no institutional support, and now it's full institutional. In fact, this is a statistic that I found wild, that there are a little over 3,000 synagogues in America, or Jewish places of worship. Only about 30 to 36 of them are openly anti-Zionist. That's 1%.
Insane.
That's crazy. Insane that this fascist, genocidal ideology, which, by the way, we're not even just saying that. That's the UN definition of Zionism, to be very clear.
Yeah.
It's completely overtaken their institutions. Or, talk about the, religious aspect once again, right? Talk about how, Catholics have reactionary ideology, which of course they do. But say what you want, but at this point, if you go to a Catholic church, you're not really going to hear a lot of openly anti-gay, bigoted shit anymore, even though Catholicism is generally pretty anti-gay. It's one of those things where, things can evolve. And, we talked about how it's ahistorical. These Zoomer, black pill Catholic freaks are a niche minority. You go to any church in America, any Catholic church in America, you will not see these people. These people don't go to church. They exist only online, to be very clear.
Yeah, and again, they are unrecognizable to any sort of traditional or community-focused version of Christianity around the world and throughout time.
Yeah, exactly. It is one of those things. I'm not sure how much longer you want to go on the subject, but I do have some final thoughts. So do you have anything to say before I get to my final thoughts?
No, I think I've about said mine. You know what? If you're a Christian and maybe you feel alienated by modernity and late capitalism and liberalism and moral relativism, don't want to go towards all this stupid, weird internet basement dweller bullshit, read Jesus the Man and His Work by Wallace Wattles. You might find it interesting.
No, absolutely. And, I don't have any necessarily reading materials, obviously. But I will say is that if you're seeing these just loser fucking scumbag, just basement dwelling people, it's just the same thing that we had with the pickup artist thing. And, we're going to get into it with, when we have a dedicated actual incel, full incel episode. But, it's one of those things where if you see these extremist online communities, just whatever you find on these communities, try to talk to normal people about them and just see how little they understand. It's one of those things where, for most ideologies, just literally say the things that you read online and believe, and the vast majority of those things will be wow, I sound like a real fucking idiot right now. And to be clear, there are so many people who are raised online, we kind of all went through that. And to be fair, it's also kind of just part of, this is for the younger set. We're not talking about people who are 25 and older who are just these degenerate pieces of shit. But if you're 16 or whatever, it's just part of growing up is that you have these ideas and eventually you're socialized into not believing some of the worst shit. But unfortunately, online just kind of exacerbates a lot of that because it's a safe place where you don't have to have your ideas challenged. And then you don't even have to go outside anymore for the most part. Outside of going to your job or school or, whatever, you don't have to really go out and do anything anymore. You can just stay online all fucking day. And to be fair, there's obviously been a handful of positive developments. As we mentioned on other episodes, the rise of modern day socialism and, socialist organizing wouldn't exist without the internet in a lot of ways. But there's also been a lot of negatives on that too, the reactionary turn of a lot of young people. And to be clear, I'm not one of those people that say, Zoomers are reactionary or Zoomers are liberal or whatever. I think they're a generation like any other. We'll see how things are in 10 or 15 years when they start getting the actual levers of power. But I don't think it's going to be honestly all that different from previous generations, to be honest with you. But no, as I said earlier, if you have an ideology that you're really, really into, just talk to normal people about it and see how long that lasts. And you know what?
Yeah.
If some of it makes sense or some of it isn't as scary to some people, modify it here and there. But yeah, if you see miserable people on the internet talking about something, it's probably bad. It's probably something that you should not have as your entire identity, just to be very clear. And that's everything from anime Marxists to fucking reactionary Catholic, like fucking groypers.
Yeah.
But yes, so I think that was a very interesting subject. And it's certainly something that we will get into, in bits and pieces in other episodes, because
There's a lot of meat on them bones.
there really fucking is. Jesus Christ. I mean, Christianity in this country has been everything from a pro-genocidal ideology to a pro-liberation ideology. And to be fair, that's Christianity worldwide. But it's one of those things where it's just such a multifaceted subject in America in particular that we will certainly get back into it. But I think that will be the end of this particular subject for this episode. So let's get into our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, you can, subscribe to and follow us on both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic series. Last time I checked, Brian, with the, group chat that we're all in, they are working hard on future episodes and stuff like that. I think they are, still a bit behind on their funding goal, but, they're getting there every day. They're great friends of ours, they're great supporters of us. We want to see their dream become a reality. And, Brian, do you have any updates on their end, or is it basically the same as?
So I have been speaking pretty regularly with Scott. We keep in touch. So right now, Scott's very busy. He's doing, he has other jobs. He has other work he does, acting he does the Mario Players Club and all these other things, doing that. Sean's taking a break. He's dealing with some stuff. He's spending time with his family, I know, which is fabulous. Nothing's changed with the episode. It's where it's at. It's ready to go. And Scott's very excited about it. We're very excited about it. I think we're about ready to have Scott on for a subject. I've been talking with him about it. We feel pretty good about it. So he'll be on pretty soon. I'm sure he'll have lots of cool things to share with us.
All right. Sounds like a good plan. And, as we always say with the Lucifer and the Father campaign, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, just showing us that you donated. And we will, within good reason, match those donations, because we want Scott, Sean, Robert's dreams to become a reality. And before we get to the Luigi pluggable, I totally forgot about my own personal pluggable. So, of course, I have the Tailoring Your Budget YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram pages. Now, I have once again still not uploaded any actual, content to those channels. I actually took a pretty comprehensive vacation to Asia recently, specifically Japan. So I did actually shoot some footage for that. So I'm going to, probably integrate that into my first ever video. But either way, still working on, creating that first bit of content for all those channels. But feel free to, follow, subscribe, and like all the content that comes from there, because, it's one of those things where, just like with basically any subject that we cover, personal finance especially is very much a personal passion of mine. It's one of those things where I think a lot of people, especially talk about the economy. I mean, who the fuck knows how things are going to be in the next coming weeks or months, but especially with this stupid Iran war that's been going on, the global economy is not doing so hot, and it's only certainly going to get worse. So it's one of those things where you might want to tighten your belts and get ready. And I feel like I have a perspective on those things that might help you out a little bit. I'm not going to solve all your problems, obviously, but I feel like I have some good practical advice when it comes to personal finance, at the very least.
Yeah, for listeners, if you're not sure, when I met Taylor, he's always been very good with finances, very good with budgeting, very interested in economics. We used to kind of tease him for it, and I gotta tell you, he's kind of killing it compared to where the rest of us all are, in our friend group in our mid-30s now. So it's gonna be great short form content too. I'm following Tailoring Your Budget on TikTok. I think it's gonna be material that I know he's well suited to, but that will be kind of taking an intimidating subject and I think making it into nice, digestible product that you can get something out of, because obviously there's a lot of financial quote-unquote advice online, and it's all bullshit.
Yeah, there's a lot of BS to wade through, a lot of scammer bullshit, and also talk about reactionary. Like, the online personal finance space is overwhelmingly reactionary. Like, it is something that,
You don't say it.
I want to say even liberal, even finding a liberal personal finance person is pretty goddamn difficult. So I'm hoping to kind of even that playing field just a little bit, just being my own personal self. But at the same time, like I said, feel free to subscribe, like, and follow that content. And I promise you, I will never, even no matter how big I get, I will never hawk a shitcoin at you. I promise you, I will never do that. I don't even know if I'll ever even create a free course or something. You don't have to worry about that bullshit for me at the fuck all, because oh boy, that shit is really a deep web that nobody wants to get fucking involved in. But speaking of deep webs that unfortunately one innocent individual got sucked in, the Luigi Mangione Defense Fund. Now, I don't think there's actually been any updates in quite a while on the Luigi Mangione trial. The last thing I heard is that federal prosecutors are trying to, speed through just getting the trial started, which really strikes to me as they have a very weak case. Because, like, why would federal prosecutors want to get the trial started if they're, like, building this amazing fucking case? I think they know that they have a very weak case ahead. And, of course, we've been saying that forever. There is so much circumstantial evidence. There's really no hard evidence. And, of course, as we've always said, we don't believe Luigi did it. And we have, frankly, more facts on our side than they have facts on their side. So we need to support Luigi in a lot of ways, in any way that you personally can. You know, both Brian and I have donated to the crowdfund, so we both believe in it.
That's right.
And we always say, you know, just like with Lucifer and the Father campaign, you know, just send us a YouTube comment, send us an email showing us you donated, and we will, within reason, about $15-20 match those donations. Because, of course, we want Luigi's dreams of freedom to become a reality. And, you know, just like another piece of news that dropped, of course, was that he's not even facing the most severe charges anymore. Like, when federal prosecutors are like, oh, yeah, we're just going to drop all the most severe stuff, that means they have a shit case. Honestly, I would not be surprised with how much money and how much he's willing to argue that they might just be like, all right, 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, and they'll just like keep going down. I would not be shocked if that genuinely happens. And, you know, obviously it's up to Luigi whether he wants to, you know, fully take that to trial or not. But I would not be surprised if federal prosecutors are literally begging him to take a deal right now and they're just not telling people about it. I would be shocked because of how flimsy the evidence is.
Keep talking about Luigi. Send him a letter if you want. Donate. We think he's in a pretty good place, but they really want to get him. They really want to make an example of him. So don't let it fall from your mind.
No, absolutely. And, you know, speaking of things that don't fall out of your mind, of course, we have a Patreon page. Now, we don't have any patrons at the moment, but become our very first patron today. You know, if you're talking to your very normie, hopefully not tradcath, groiper fucking teammate at work, and you just talk to them about these, like, weird fucking incel freaks online, and they're just going to be like, yeah, that's interesting. Do you have any more, like, content about that? Well, with the $5 tier that we have, you can learn 48 hours early on some things that you can tell your normie coworker about a subculture that nobody should frankly ever talk about because they suck. But you'll have 48 hours ahead of time to get that info to that normie coworker of yours.
The life you save may be theirs or your own.
You'll be saving a life by giving us money. Just straight up. Just give us money. As DSP says, give us money, you worthless humans. Love DSP. He's the
friend
fucking
of the pod
king.
DSP, friend of the pod Turkey Tom.
You know, I would have said this up until, you know, the tail end of 2024, but he really was the Assad of Let's Players. Like, everybody's like, we need to get rid of DSP, and he's like, what did you say? And then it's like, allegation confirmed or something, and they just laugh. God, Teflon Phil, holy shit. But, you know, speaking of people who aren't Teflon, Brian, do you have any pluggables as well?
Yeah, as always, you can follow me on Instagram and Threads at JLoBiafra, JLoBiafra. It's a millennial pun username. Those were the style at the time, JLoBiafra. You can also follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. That is where every episode is posted when it airs. That is also probably, in relation to me and the podcast, the best way to reach out to us. If you want to cyberbully us, stalk us, harass us, if you want my advice on converting to Christianity because you read Wallace Waddles and you just really loved it, if you want to give me money, if you want to give me praise, if you want to do a Gamergate on us because you feel like we are ruining society, the best way to do it is to find us at Millennials Are Old Pod, Instagram and Threads, direct message us.
No, absolutely. That's fantastic. And, you know, speaking of things that are also fantastic, Brian, I am just feeling enlightened by my own atheism. No, I'm kidding. I can't even remember what that quote was. It was so fucking bad. And to be fair, even at the time, I was like, oh my God, this is so fucking cringe. But say what you want, man. I feel like we need a little bit more cringy lay Reddit atheism, to be honest with you. I feel like we kind of need that.
It's ripe for a comeback.
It really fucking is. And to be clear, if you're a based, non-reactionary Christian, we do like you.
The best friends of the pod are based, non-reactionary Christians who make cool art. They are independent artists. We love them. We're going to have them on the show again soon.
Absolutely. So if you're a cool Christian who's not a bigot and a reactionary groiper, then, you know, feel free to listen to our show. But, you know, speaking of, I think that ends our episode. And, you know, Brian, I don't need to be enlightened by anything because I'm fucking tired and I'm old and I think we both.
Yeah, I'm turning the lights out and going to sleep.
Exactly. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight, and we'll come back with a great episode for you next time, as always.